And I would like to open it up to questions before we move on to some previously prepared questions that we have for the group. But I do want to open the floor up. Any questions? So in case you couldn't hear it in the back, the question is about XML and when you convert to XML, and what are the advantages to doing it at various points in the workflow, so earlier or later?
Right. So, so our journals, our prepress vendor does do XML first. They also rerun the XML at a later stage. But when XML is done first and we get files for copy editing, it does make it easier for our copy and production editors to see different nuggets of the XML. Some of our journals, we work with two different prepress vendors. One journal, they give us a toggle back and forth, so whoever is working the file can actually toggle from a WYSIWYG screen to the actual tagging screen, just to see what the exact tag is. Another prepress vendor, we don't do that toggle, have that toggle in place, but because of the style sheets that are attached after the XML is run, we can see, you know, whether it's a first name, surname in the author string, and appropriately apply different style sheets to different elements, and that all is captured in the XML.
I would just say we're doing XML first too. We're doing XML first too. One of the benefits for us is really the metadata pieces, because if it's in XML from the beginning, all of that can flow seamlessly on the back end into our vendor systems as well. So there's less potential for a copy and paste being needed or something like that. So there's less potential for error.
Another question? Yeah. Sure.
Not today, but in other discussions with some publishers, there's indication that whatever the first version is, they'll consider it the version of record because it has the DOI. But then there could be changes made to that document, and they still use the same DOI. So we don't know with complete certainty what version the reader has read, or in our case, what was loaned or whatever. So for document management purposes, I would like to
Sure.
What are the rules about DOI assignment, and then what in practice is happening?
Okay, great.
I could take that first.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, at Cambridge, we assign the DOI as soon as it comes into our production system. Our first view publication is that is truly an article of record, because each of those articles published under first view has gone through all of our quality control checks. It is, aside from the final pagination, the same article that would eventually be published in an issue. So I think it's pretty clear from the Cambridge point of view. That's right. Mm-hmm.
I could say something about that. So one of the benefits of using Crossmark is that you can say which is the most recent up-to-date version of the paper, even if you haven't changed your DOI. I mean, it's the same DOI, but one of the problems that I think you're getting at, though, is you may not know what your patron has looked at. And so if they've accessed it on a particular day and they've looked at the manuscript version of something, you may not know that. But when they bring that PDF that they downloaded up again, if there's a cross mark on it, they can then know that there's something newer or changed, or that there's been a correction or something like that. There are some rules, but I think publishers also interpret them a little differently. And I don't know, Chuck was in here earlier. Is he not in the room anymore? Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Chuck. Do you want to say something about what the rules are and where, you know, where there's an absolute rule and when there are things that are... So the question is, things change, right? And you assign a DOI to an article that you've posted online, and then there's a new version of it. And maybe there's another revision a year later. And does the publisher have to assign a new DOI? My interpretation is no, but they could choose to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That was my expectation as well, is that it's open to some interpretation.
Do you happen to know for citation purposes?
I'm sorry?
For citation purposes.
Goes to cite the work. What is the publisher's expectation? Do they cite the work they actually use? Or they cite the canonical version that ultimately is within the DOI?
Well, I think if the user knows that the version that they've looked at is still, like, you know, an early version, that it's not the composed page yet or something like that, they might actually say the date that they accessed the article. And sometimes that helps to differentiate for someone who looks at that reference. So they publish something and they say, I looked at this article, here's the DOI, I accessed it on this date. And then someone else, when they go to look at that, might say, oh, well, it's been revised since then. So usually, and best practice for publishers is not to remove earlier versions. So you, as another reader, could then go back and see what's the version that this particular person looked at when they wrote their paper.
Another question? Sure.
Yeah, can I ask you a related question? Slightly is, you know which is the version of it that's the one that's page, there's a DOI. And on that page you have a PDF, HTML, you might have EPUB, you might have XML, etc. Which is your format of it? So supposing in 5 years' time I come and say, right, I've read the PDF, but I've just looked at HTML. I can see H2O here, but this one says H3O, and the XML says H4O. The author's passed away, and you, Ed, from CUP, the world's oldest publisher, I would like your explanation as to which one is correct. Do you have or any other person, which is your format? Put you on the spot.
No, I expected you to at some point, Kaveh. Honestly, I don't think we have a real answer, a firm answer to that question right now. I would say if really pressed, and I suppose I am being really pressed right now, I'd say it's the PDF, because the PDF, the PDF is what we've published, is an exact representation of what we've published in print and online. So we've got both media covered in that sense. I think most people are reading the PDF. That's what our feedback tells us whenever we do some marketing research and ask our readers how they're using our material. But I do think that's going to change. We're moving more journals to online-only publication, and we're starting to publish journals that will really truly exist only online. The Journal of Linguistic Geography that I referenced in my presentation is one such journal. We have, I call it online mostly in the office usually, because I mean, we've got all these journals we moved to supposedly online only, and the second they move there, I have people asking me for a print copy of because this was a special issue and we need 300 copies printed, sent somewhere. So really, I thought this was online only. We have a new journal coming in that was presented to me as online only, but when I read the contract, it said that we're printing 50 to 100 copies for the editorial board. Well, that's not online only. That's a short-run print job. But anyway, but we do have journals that are starting up that are truly online only. And I think when that happens, when you have scalable maps and you have audio and video embedded in the article, then it is going to have to be may say the HTML5 version is going to be the version of record. So I think it's fluid. I think it's fluid right now, but I think it's definitely going in the direction.
For us at PLUS, it's definitely not the PDF, it's the HTML, mainly because well, for one thing, we're not printing, even though we still have PDF, but there's a whole constellation of information that surrounds the HTML version that you don't get in a PDF. I mean, you can download the PDF, but you're not going to get, video, you're not going to get supplementary files. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that we believe is part of that article once it's published, and going into the future. And, some people would say it's the comments and the citations and the press stuff and all of that. Personally, I draw the line, but I think more and more people are considering it's that whole online presence on the website that is really the article of record. So.
And that's also what we consider ours at Wolters Kluwer. It is the online version of it, not the PDF.
Which online?
The HTML version.
But, sorry, I'm being very sort of provocative here because I just want to talk about it. But you all have XML versions, for example, PLUS, you do have the XML version. And I applaud you because you're one of the few publishers that publish your XML. I don't understand why others don't publish. But then, what's the point of having XML? Because you're saying, sorry, supposing I find the difference between the XML and the HTML. Again, so you can just have the HTML and not have wasting the money to create the XML if you're not sure the content is right.
Well, I think there'd probably be people at PLUS who would agree with you, but we have an obligation right now to submit everything to PMC, which requires XML. And that's the archive version.
That may not be right, because you're saying the HTML.
No, if we make corrections to articles, we re-syndicate to PubMed Central. So that is up to date. In fact, we re-syndicate our figures back to Figshare if changes are made to them as well. So the online is definitely updated. We may not redo the PDF.
Kavi, let me throw one back to you.
I expect you to.
I'm guessing that what you're suggesting is that during the XML creation, there could be some, or the final XML creation or delivery to the publisher, there could be some changes made to the article that would make the PDF and the XML or the HTML, there might be some slight differences. I mean, we have a very high confidence level that that's not happening. We do a lot of quality control checks on the back end to make sure that that does not. Can you cite more than one instance of cases where there are differences in the same article between the PDF and the XML, HTML?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I looked on the web.
Mhm.
You can access articles.
Mhm.
You can see symbols are different.
Okay.
Mhm. So if I can just finish, what I'm trying to say is XML. You always think of XML as the core, as the archive, as the definitive copy, as the sort of mother that's from that EPUB, etc. But it's only you can only use it as such if you have absolute confidence. In fact, you should have more confidence in your XML than your PDF. Everyone is saying we're doing XML first, but it's important to be fully automated XML, not just under XML first. So if you go at the last minute and say, remove this comma, then the vendor should remove the comma from the XML, press the button, and the PDF comes out, and the HTML comes out, etc. So that's my view. That if you have that, then your XML is really very useful going 20 years into the future. Otherwise, in the future, you say, well, here's XML, but if it's not right, have a look at the PDF.
Yeah, and I think for us, our XML is actually feeding into what becomes the HTML version. So the HTML isn't separate. We've submitted XML, and then that's the HTML came out for the online viewing. So for us, there wouldn't be a difference between the XML and the HTML. Right, yes, it does.
Right.
In theory, they all should be the same. I think what he's referring to is if there was a correction made and someone made it in say the XML and not in the PDF, that could be problematic. But that is something that I think we're all working to QC our way away from, so that if it's made in one place, it goes to every other place. And XML is where we found the best way to do that.
Right, and I can actually say that we do the same thing. If we need a redelivery, if we make a change, then it's done to the XML, and that populates, for the HTML and the PDF as well. It all comes from the XML stream.
Other questions? Yeah?
I'd love to visit Ed's question about speed versus quality in the marketplace. I know it's just a huge issue all the time, sort of balancing those two ideas.
And I think that's one of the questions that Helen and I had talked about exploring. So I guess this is a case where we can open it up to the panel and to the audience as well. Just that balancing act between speed and quality, where you draw the line, what you're willing to give up. And then, in Helen's case, the concern where you think you've gone too far in one direction. And
Yeah, and I would say one of the things that's happening right now is, of course, we're trying to rebalance so that we're not so set on speed that we need to pay more attention to that quality until we can get it back up to a level that authors and readers are happy with, and then we'll work. We're also working on speed as well. It's just there's always a balance there. And I think we just need to recognize that and try to maximize for both if we can.
Get a little bit more specific. Do you think that overall, in general, sort of the global marketplace when it comes to an article, do you think that, I've been in that field for a long time, and I have this sense that the marketplace has decided to a certain degree that will take a reduction in quality to get there fast.
Well, I think that's the whole impetus behind posting accepted manuscripts. I mean, it's most important, and the authors, I think, feel that way too. They're willing to put their manuscript out there because they need to establish primacy, they need to get things out quickly, they need to get their next grant funding done, and then they're willing to wait for, the final article that looks nice and has been copy edited and whatever else. So I think, at the beginning, there were many publishers who would not do that, including Cold Spring Harbor. No, not going to do that. And other publishers who were like, yep, let's just get those manuscripts out there. We don't care. And so they were all dealing with that kind of, where's that balance going to come in? And over time, I know at AACR too, we went that direction as well. It said, okay, it's time to start posting manuscripts because we're losing a competitive advantage because other journals were doing it. And so I think it depends on, when that tipping point happens for that journal or that publisher.
I think it's important to remember that you can't sacrifice accuracy, especially when we're that's part of quality, and especially when we're publishing STM titles, where a comma really can matter, whether or a decimal point can really matter. I think where we may have sacrificed, or we certainly sacrificed quality, is in areas like display, letter spacing, hyphenation. There definitely has been a drop-off in the level of quality there. I mean, we publish a lot of humanities journals too, and we publish for some societies for which that is still very important. They're really consumed, and I have to pay attention to that for those journals. So the definition of quality can be different depending on the discipline you're working in or a particular title. But yeah, you can't sacrifice accuracy.
Right. From Cold Spring Harbor Lab Press, from our journals, I can tell you that we still really are very invested in copy editing and quality, but there have been, we have rolled it back or dialed it back a little bit. Whereas in the past, when I first joined the press, like 12 years ago, and we were very, very fastidious about every hyphen, compound noun. We had huge lists. Our style manual was really huge. And, with the advent of online, we realized, well, how are readers finding articles? Well, they're not necessarily reading our journals print cover to cover. They're mostly going online, finding the article that they want to read. And so how we rolled back our quality a little bit was to say, well, we would say to the copy editors, here's our style manual. Basically we do expect you to follow it to a T, but if we're asking for a faster turnaround time or just in general, as long as you're consistent, your copy editing is consistent within the piece, and you also adhere to all of our main style points, then everything else could fall by the wayside in terms of from piece to piece, because readers really, it depends on your journal, of course. I was saying this to Ed on the break. It really depends on your journal and your community of readers. But for our readers in the biological sciences, I really don't think anyone is reading our issues covered, from one issue cover to cover. They're just, reading the articles that speak to them. And so as long as consistency is adhered to, and of course grammar and punctuation, that just goes without saying, and our main style points, then our take these days is that's really good enough, because we do have to, like all of you, have to balance it with speed. So that is where we have dialed it back a little bit.
I would just say for us, where we've started to look for where we can get more speed is in the composition process itself. So looking to more standardized templates. Again, not with every customer we have. We have, as I mentioned, several journals with several different templates. But for more standardized journals, or for societies or editors who are really concerned with the speed, we can work on getting the composition down. So that's 24 hours for a PDF. Instead of the current schedule, which is about 5 to 7 days, depending on the journal. So that's one way we've looked at it. Not so much let's take copy editing out of the picture, but let's look at what we can truly automate.
And I guess I'll weigh in here. I've been sitting quietly because many of the questions have been more publisher policy related. But as a production vendor, in terms of our customers, I think the first thing, most of our customers turn to us and say is, you know, we're not going to give on copy editing quality, we're not going to give on even display, but we do expect more automation. So I think the first step toward that speed is automating as much as possible the movement of files and the processing and those types of things. But again, then if you really want to look at some time savings, it's often streamlining your style guide, going into a templated composition system, and if you have multiple journals within your organization, trying to get them standardized across the board. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Kathy, yeah?
On that point of templates, Ed mentioned, Faye mentioned as well. Why is it simply the policy of the publisher whether you have templates? How come, for example, say Elsevier have 5 or 6 templates for thousands of journals? Is it that when you go to a new society, is it your policy to be more lenient, or what is it?
I don't know if it's our policy. It's certainly the way a lot of our editors operate. They, we like to be seen as a publisher that will be very cooperative with the society, will let a society retain its own voice in a lot of different ways. We'll make recommendations to them about policy matters, sometimes very strong recommendations, but we make it clear that the final decision is theirs. We're really looking for a partnership, and sometimes that means, well, you like this style, we're going to let you keep it. There have been times when I've been engaged in the process of helping to win a journal, and I've suggested that here's an existing style at Cambridge. We could fit your journal very easily into this style, and that suggestion is not always accepted. And sometimes our editors even steer me away from it. But I think, yeah, for us, it's a matter of it's the way we operate. It's that Cambridge wants to be seen as a very cooperative publisher, and we'll let the society keep its image and keep its voice.
We do a similar thing. So when a journal is onboarded, we go through a design process with them. So we certainly try to get them into more of one of our accepted templates, but at the same time, a lot of times they come with their own branding. So, and they have their own requirements, and so we're working it in as much as we can. So maybe we'll standardize more like trim size versus how everything appears, and we try and do things that way, but it really is individualized based on the society customer. So we have some proprietary titles as well. They are all much more standardized.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another question or comment?
Mm-hmm. So how long, if I just want to make sure I understand the question properly. It's about, mm-hmm. The peer review process. Okay, how long is the question then is how long is the peer review process for a journal? Well, there's great variation in that, it can depend on the discipline, and it depends largely on the attributes of the editor-in-chief of the journal and that editor's editorial board. We put as many journals as we can through one of the peer review systems, like Editorial Manager or Scholar One, and in a systems manner, they help speed the process of peer review quite a bit. We have some smaller journals that don't use those systems, and they just use email or FTP as a means of moving the manuscripts around. But I mean, we are trying to move as many journals as we can into one of the real peer review systems. But even within those, there's wide variation. Anybody who's an academic or anybody who works closely with an editorial board, I'm sure, realizes that it can be very difficult for editors to find reviewers. Then the editors have to chase the reviewers. There are some reviewers who will be very responsive. They'll return the review within the stipulated time, whatever that is, and others who have to be chased. So I don't have a one specific date to tell you about that. There's just really wide variation. I would say that with some of the STM journals, where there's much more of an emphasis on speed of publication, that the peer review process can be pretty quick, maybe a month, 2 months. But some of the humanities journals, it's really hard to say. There's nothing firm at all. It can be quite lengthy, in fact, sometimes.
Oh, you're waiting for me to say something. Okay. Well, just like there's variation between journals, there is wide variation even at PLOS One. I've seen papers go through from submission to acceptance in a month, which is pretty fast. But it can take quite a bit longer than that. There are a number of, I mean, we could do this session again just to talk about the editorial process. There are so many things going on there, and sometimes papers, get caught up in different places. We're doing a lot of checks for not just things like ethics, but now data policy, all kinds of things. It may take time depending on the topic, because PLOS One is very broad. It may take more time than we'd like for a paper to find an editor to handle it, much less find reviewers then. We have a fairly good review turnaround. We ask for 10 days, and we mostly get it, although we chase too. We chase editors, we chase authors, we chase everybody. So it can be quite a long time, but, and then of course depending on, generally for PLOS One we have one round of revision. Occasionally there's more, but for the most part we see one round. So again, it's very, very variable. Does that answer your question? Yes, of course, everybody wants to be very fast, and that's why we have, like I said, we have about 200 papers coming in a day. We have 5,000 academic editors to handle papers, and that's not enough. So, because I have to be in almost every subject area now, the scope of it has broadened so much that we're always looking for more people to handle papers.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a normal part of our workflow, and or it's not a codified part of our workflow. But if an author requests to see second proofs, either because the corrections were heavy or just because the author wants the reassurance of seeing extra proofs, we'll send them. We will send them to the author. But there are a couple exceptions. We have a couple journals that are very rapid publication journals, and for those we won't. But for most of our journals, if an author requests it, sure, we'll send a revised proof to them.
Oh, okay. From Cold Spring Harbor, in answer to your question, we don't allow second proofs to go back to authors, but when there are heavy corrections, we still won't allow second proofs to go back. However, we will clip that page or certain passages from the corrected proof and send them back to the author, so they can, they can feel calmer that everything was handled well. We've never had any problems with that, but we have a very fast processing time, and so we tell them, well, here's what you've asked for, and you have to tell us today or at the latest tomorrow morning if there's a problem. But we don't. As a general rule, we don't.
I've got a question that relates to the quality versus speed issue. Most academics aren't really concerned how long it takes after it hits publisher to actually get print. They're concerned about the whole process. And I've seen, at least with the journal that we publish, our editors are doing a lot of desk rejects. So they get it, they look at it, 2 days later, they tell them they know there's no chance of being published. And it's up to about 30% of the submissions on it, which of course really reduces that response time, because that's 2 days to a decision. How does that factor? How common is that process of desk rejects?
Honestly, I don't know. I would have to check with our various editors to know that. I mean, again, we publish in so many different disciplines that it would be, and it's idiosyncratic in a lot of cases too. How one editor wants to work as opposed to another. So yes, sorry, I can't really answer that.
Give it a shot. So we, for the most part, final decisions are made by academic editors. PLOS One is sort of a distributed kind of journal. We don't have an editor-in-chief. So desk rejects only happen for articles that don't meet the basic requirements when the internal editors do a scan of them. So there's a beginning place where internal editors look at every paper, and they will pull things out that are where the English isn't very good. They'll send them back, ask for revisions, and send them off to an editing service. If it comes back again and it's not readable, they will desk reject. If they can't explain or show evidence that they've been through an internal review board for animal ethics and things like that, sometimes we will desk reject those kinds of articles, but not for scope or fit. Those generally go through, and an editor will send it to review if they think it's worth it.
Yeah, actually those criteria apply for journals that Cambridge publishes as well. I think the arrangements, the publishing arrangements are different. That activity is occurring at university offices where the editors-in-chief are, and so I don't always see those decisions. But yeah, if a journal is in very poor English and it can't even be read, that'll be sent back. If basic science is wrong, the article will be rejected.
And I'm pulling from my previous experience. I would say it's often a philosophical question with the editor-in-chief or the people in charge. So some people view an editorial reject or a desk reject as a courtesy to the author because you're rapidly moving them through the peer review process and they can go shop another journal. And some people see the peer review, going through full peer review, as a courtesy you extend to all public, all potential manuscripts that are submitted, because it is essentially the courteous, collegial way to handle it. So it's often philosophical.
And if I could add, too, from my experience at AACR, where we were an association publishing journals, there were definitely discussions about which side to go with on that, and the reject without review rate was going up very high, and there were certainly editors who felt that that was part of the mission of the society, that it was owed to the author to give them some substantial remarks back on their papers. But yeah, our reject without review rate was going up and up. And still, even if you're going to do that after a review, a quick turnaround is always the best.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear a little bit from the panelists about how author publication charges are integrated into production workflows. I know there's a lot of different, I work for a society that collects submission fees before the articles are peer reviewed. I know a lot of people, in the old days used to send, huge charges after the printed journal mailed. Some people are doing it before it gets into the production system, and some people do it at groups. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about what your guys' experiences are and sort of what the best methods you found for actually, collecting fees, collecting them efficiently, quickly, and kind of not spending lots of production time chasing that.
Okay. I'll tell you a little bit about how we do APCs at PLOS. We've actually just put in a publication fee assistance program. It's completely separate from the editorial process. So when an author submits, they're asked to say whether or not they're agreeing to pay or if they want to apply for publication fee assistance. If they choose to apply for the fee assistance, that request goes one direction, and their paper still continues on the editorial process. So the finance people all deal with, what kinds of funding do you have, and what organization are you with, and are there funds available, and all that kind of stuff. And they make a decision that's completely separate from the editorial decision about whether we want to publish that manuscript or not. And then the after acceptance, while something is still in the production process, they do send out the billing for it, if it's going to be billed for. And again, it's completely separate. The editors and even the staff in the editorial area don't know whether or not that article has had fee assistance or not.
As far at Cambridge, to some extent, this goes to one of the panel questions that Jennifer wanted to bring up. We've essentially outsourced that just very recently. We've collaborated with RightsLink. So when an article comes into our production system, well, we don't levy page charges per se, but if an article is, if the author wants to publish the article as open access, then that'll be indicated in our production system, and the request will go back to RightsLink. And then they'll work with the author to collect the open access fees, and when they've done that, they'll return it to us. There is a person in production who is responsible for that. Then that information will be conveyed back to the relevant production editor, who will make sure that the article is tagged as an open access article in our systems and eventually cited as open access when it's published. RightsLink is also going to take on color charge processing for us. They'll have to liaise with the production editor, of course, to get the proper estimate. I think that'll be about it. We have a separate arrangement right now for off prints. I mean, we don't do very many paper off prints anymore, and we don't do any free paper off prints, but we do still sell paper off prints through the Sheridan Press author system. So, although that's only for the U.S. In the U.K., RightsLink is eventually going to take care of the off print, whatever off print charges they have over there too.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone does it a little bit differently, but we too are looking, we talk to different vendors about taking over the collection of the fees, but we still are doing it internally. The forms that we have added to the submission system, all those forms do is an author will sign at acceptance that they will pay fees, and they know what those, most of those fees are, if not all, at that point. And we still are collecting fees. We have production assistants who work with authors at the e-proof at the first page stage, and we do still collect those and then work with our accounting department on any authors who are delinquent, and they will run those down. But it would be nice to to offload this to some vendor, but we really haven't found one whose prices really fit for us.
And we have a vendor who handles the pricing portion for us. So the paperwork and the decision making, or the decision on behalf of the author is making that before the article is submitted to production, and they're saying yes, they would like an article to be open access. So that information is coming to us, and then the article goes through to an open access workflow. The author is directed to a website where they can go and pay for their charges. And then in production, we receive reports daily on what payments have been made. And so we've decided that if there isn't a payment received by Revised Pages, then the article will not be open access. And that's our final deadline.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
So, in terms of composition vendors, how many do each, how I know that there's 300 journals versus, so do you guys have any best practices of, is it better just to keep one, or is it, do you need 2 or 3, or how many is too many? I know some people will have one because it's easier, but maybe 2 do not have all your eggs in one basket.
I would definitely suggest not having one. We did that several years ago. We had one main vendor, and when things went bad, it was difficult. Yeah, it was bad. So we have a group of core vendors. I can't say like what the perfect number would be, but you definitely don't want to get into a situation where you have one vendor that has 2 journals. So I think you need to look at your number of journals and also the style. So certain vendors have different capabilities. Some of them are better at the automation. Some of them are better with copy editing or just the workflow. So it's really fitting the journal to the vendor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I generally agree with that. It seems like we have roughly the same number of journals. We have about 350 globally now. But our systems between the UK and the US are very closely integrated. So I will independently assign my journals to whichever typesetter I see fit. But if I was going to take on a new vendor, I'd work with our global production director who's based in the UK. So of the 350, for the 350, we have 5, 6 different typesetters. They're not all common between the US and the UK. I think that's a maximum number, probably. We might even consider reducing the number slightly. Although I don't want to be too alarmist about that in case any of my current vendors are out here. But yeah, definitely more than one. You can't put or you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. And the typesetters do have the various, their strengths and weaknesses. The other thing I would say though is, you are going to hit some. If you're with a vendor for any period of time, you're undoubtedly going to hit some rough patches. And I've found that it's probably best to try and weather the storm if you can. Work with them, try to gain an improvement. We saw the vendor transition presentation. That is a last resort, moving a vendor, especially for typesetting, because it can be really disruptive when you do make that decision to have to move. So try to work with your typesetter as much as you can if you hit some rough patches.
Wow, I think we have time for maybe one more question. I think you've had your hand up for a while. Yeah. Purple. Yes, I don't know your name. I'm so sorry.
We do that for a couple of our journals. I see other people shaking their heads. Again, I mean, we're the bespoke publisher, and we're trying to make all our societies happy. But maybe that's a little too glib. But really, we really are trying to cooperate with our societies as much as possible. And if somebody wants that, if they have a good reason for making that request, we'll allow that. We only do that for 2 or 3 journals.
I give you a lot of credit, Ed. That would scare me to death.
I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat all the time.
Well, I think at this point, we're right up against 3:30, our stopping time. Thank you all for your participation, and thank you to all of our speakers here on the panel. And I think now we have